In this video, I want to talk about a glaring phenomena that is an impediment to transformation and change in the area of abuse of power, and in this case, sexual abuse by a therapist. Now, this conversation is necessary because of a glaring phenomena. Rich Pascoe, someone I've chatted with on and off and enjoyed at workshops, writes to me and wishes me happy birthday on LinkedIn and asks how I'm doing. And I said, I'm doing terribly. I'm dealing with sexual abuse from Peter Sandhill. I'm having to look at how to protect participants. Are you interested in helping in any way? Well, that was the last time I heard from Rich Pascoe. And similarly, Fred Burks, because he's in a number of different communities, and also because he's a website pioneer. If you look at his needtoknow.org website, it's all about conspiracies or minority perspectives, and they're terrific. If you want to learn about the minority perspective on what happened with the World Trade Center or drone bombings of apartment buildings or whatever it is, Fred has gathered together information because the public needs to know. Well, Fred has moved from being relatively outside of the high community to now attending a number of workshops. And if it's important enough for the average person to know that the World Trade Center was an inside job or whatever it is, isn't it more important to know the underside or the shadow side of your community, meaning the actual people you're dealing with, and the things that are going to affect your psychological and emotional safety? Well, Fred doesn't see it that way. Fred believes that we need to know about these international issues, but that no one really needs to know that a high facilitator is sexually abusing a high participant. And because of that position, Fred refuses all support to educate the public, meaning he becomes complicit through silence and enabling in the conspiracy of silence. Now, there's a slogan, think global, act local, meaning learn about the conspiracies that happen at an international level, learn from them, and then look for where those same conspiracies are going on inside your own mind. Because we're cut from the same cloth. If governments are out undermining each other and behaving like idiots, those governments are run by human beings whose parents were just like yours and mine. So they may, and indeed are, running around like corrupt idiots because we're doing the same thing on a smaller scale. It's the mathematics of fractal patterns or holographs. You find the essential pattern in the particle that matches the essential pattern in the whole that the particles can, produce. So, whatever went on in your family, including your denial of what went on in your family, is undoubtedly playing out in larger scale at a national and cultural level, because that's how fractal social patterns work. So it's a little bit schizophrenic, isn't it? Thousands of people all want a world where everyone wins, but does not want to engage in making the change that ensures that more people win. Because let's be very clear, the statistics are in. Nobody, not Peter Sandhill, not myself, not you, not your sister, not your daughter, not your grandparents, nobody wins when a therapist has sex with a client. Pretty basic. In a psychologically illiterate cult, maybe need some discussion. But to anyone that knows the data, that is an established reality. Now, it's also pretty basic that a therapist traumatizing a client, I mean, is there any argument that that's a good idea? Come pay this professional and he will traumatize you for a considerable fee, and you can go away and suffer. Is there anyone arguing for that reality? Now, is there anyone arguing for the reality in which a therapist who is incompetent enough to sexually abuse a client, to traumatize a client, and then deny that there was anything wrong? Is there anyone arguing that that therapist, who isn't licensed, by the way, is only making those mistakes in this instance? He would be denying it to this day, except that he was so ignorant about his own ignorance that he was completely on board to the 10-hour audio recording of the entire event. Now, is there anyone who thinks that, okay, therapists sometimes behave in a completely irresponsible and destructive way with just one person, but they're totally competent and responsible in this other area? Is there anyone arguing for that? Now, unless you're arguing one of those three things, by being passive, Fred Burks, other therapists who refuse to, advocate for this, and every member of the community is participating in a statistical reality in which more people will pay money to be traumatized, shamed, sexually abused, and have a concerted effort made to silence their truth. Now, if anyone thinks that's a great idea, you'll fit right into America, just blend in with the mainstream and carry on. But if you have a problem with participating in a statistical certainty, meaning, there might be the odd exception. Maybe one person out of the 10,000 people that were sexually abused by therapists this year, maybe one of them, had a tremendous benefit, and it was just what they needed to be sexually abused by their therapist. They're grateful for it. They've learned from the experience, and their life is better than if they had not been sexually abused by their therapist. So let's just allow that statistical anomaly is out there. Does that justify destroying the lives of the other 9,999 in your mind? Well, the power is always in the witness, in the circle. It's in the majority. It takes a lot of cooperation in this cult, whether it's the national cult or the high cult, or the individual cult, for this pattern to be sustainable. Now, I happen to know that it's been going on for 10 years, and no reason to believe that it stopped after or didn't happen before, because Peter Sandhill sexually propositioned me 10 years ago, and it freaked me out so much that I left feeling worse than if I'd not gone to see a therapist. And then he did it again 10 years later, and in both cases, he did absolutely nothing wrong. To give you an idea of how well arsenaled Peter Sandhill is around these things, after I had spent $60,000 and counting, recovering from the debacle of more than 100 glaring failures on the part of Peter Sandhill's competency. It begins with him pushing for a psychedelic overdose, as if any psychedelic practitioner exerts their first influence to push someone who's never had a psychedelic experience into taking 3 times more substance than they believe is good for them. Well, that's Peter Sandhill's, kickoff move. And because he succeeded in influencing his client to start the protocol off with an overdose, a ripple effect occurs, right? Because now the client is knocked off base. I don't know if you've ever had a dissociative dose of psychedelics and tried to argue with a dysfunctional therapist who thinks they know best, to where a bunch of other mistakes come in. And of course, when you're passed out, you can't advocate for yourself. Kind of ruins a little bit of the theme, of high, that it's the participant's always at choice, right? And as long as they didn't verbally object, well, I did object for 5 minutes with Peter Sandhill. No means no, except if you're Peter Sandhill trying to induce your client into a psychedelic overdose. Then no means we need to persuade you some more. So in this dynamic, my life is falling apart as I allow this man in a paid therapeutic role to push hard and influence my decisions. Now, I'm not going to say Peter controlled them. I'm just going to say that having established a romantic and psychedelic connection after pushing into an overdose, I was much more influenceable by Peter Sandhill than I was otherwise. And so anyway, having mastered 100 glaring errors that most psychologists and actually competent trained therapists with licenses would have easily noticed. And you don't have to ask me. You could run through the hundreds of emails with facilitators or any of the protocols that Peter ran, and they'll tell you themselves if they're competent. But having done that, I felt terrible. And something seemed off. I mean, I couldn't talk to you the way I can now because I hadn't spent 1,000 hours figuring out what my therapist didn't know he didn't know and couldn't explain to me. You have to actually go to a competent therapist to find that. So I just knew something was terribly wrong, and I was as I was the first time, 10 years earlier, in way more pain than I was before hiring Peter. Certainly more broke after 60 grand and consequential decisions. But Peter Sandhill, as he was 10 years earlier, was absolutely certain that he was filled with so much love that he just couldn't contain it. That was his words. And, so much goodwill and all of this stuff. Well, since Peter Sandhill refused to stop charging a romantically entangled patient for the time, so he's now turning himself into a prostitute, I asked him to do a 1-hour session because he was dodging and avoiding. He was ignoring emails. He was, I couldn't pin him down anyway. So I hired him at $175 an hour. And the purpose of the session for me was to list all the things that seemed off to me. This bit seemed off. This bit seemed off. This bit seemed off. This bit seemed off. And this bit seemed off. Now, at the end of 45 minutes of going through Peter Sandhill's whole protocol, from ignoring emails to showing up late for sessions without communication, to escalating a sexual relationship, to refusing to answer questions, to insisting that I marry a woman I hardly met, and that this was for my benefit, one thing after another, I got to the end of that and I said, Peter, do you have anything to say? Do you apologize? Do you have any regrets about any of it? He says, no, I don't. What do you do? I said, really? He said, time's up. The hour's up. Nothing to apologize for. And this has continued, meaning he has nothing to refund either at this point. So, I don't think he gets how laughably self-destructive this level of denial is. But he is deeply reinforced in this willful ignorance by the entire facilitator body. Meaning Peter gets sick after visiting with the high facilitators. He gets a little bit healthy when he's isolated and one-on-one. Give him a high facilitator pep talk and he's all out saving the world with all of this again, and I need to look at my stuff. What stuff exactly? He's too busy to explain, but stuff for sure. There must be stuff if I'm bringing up any issues of his. So the question is a student, because Peter's the youngest or one of the youngest facilitators, is a student who's certified and trained by all the older facilitators in this state of ignorance and incompetence, does he just pop out of nowhere? Just a one-off, has nothing to do with the facilitator body. Now, this is a reasonable question. And in many ways, the facilitators have gone out of their way to answer that question. Because a responsible teacher and leadership body, upon hearing that one of their colleagues traumatized, sexually abused, broke the law, blah, 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 to their client that they recommended to him, is horrified, takes responsibility, discloses the information and puts the public first. But that's not what High did. First they said it probably didn't happen. So I had to get out the 10-hour recording. So they had to admit it happened. So then what was their next move? It's not a High issue. I sent them 2 letters explaining why it was a High issue. Well, they just ignored those. Is it passive-aggressive? Is it fear? Is it stupidity? Who knows? They then, after me asking to be listened to and to be held, decided to do the exact opposite. No one held me. And they all excluded me to meet with Peter Sandhill to hear his version of the events. You got a 10-hour recording, that's the events. But they want to hear Peter's version of the events. And in Peter's version, none of it is his fault. It never is. Right now he's being persecuted. As we speak, 6 years later, He's going around talking about how bad he feels, how on the spot he feels that people are talking about his abuse, such that anonymous callers leave messages on my voicemail. They won't leave caller ID because people with undefensible positions don't like to be seen. So anonymous, unnamed people call up and say, "It's terrible what you're doing. Peter's made mistakes, no questions." But this, telling his possible clients that he's unfit to be a therapist, this? Come on. Since when should pedophilic therapists be disqualified from further victimizing the public? It's unfair. It's about as unfair as Trump actually being asked to leave the White House because he lost the election. There must be something wrong. What is it? It's fraud. Had been set up. Well, if the entire organization cannot even pull it together to issue an apology, you think that they maybe had something to do? Maybe Peter was a decent, empathic person before they fucked with his head. So I don't think we can isolate these viruses and say only Peter is contagious. Now, he's obviously contagious. I started to go blind when he started to explain to me why he had lied to his wife and didn't tell her we were going to have a psychedelic session. He explained it very reasonably. He said it's much more convenient that way. I thought, no doubt it is. Maybe I should have convenient emissions like this with my wife. I mean, why tell awkward truths that intelligent people might protest? You know? Why prevent myself from stumbling into the same mistake that upset Sarah so much 10 years earlier? Why do that? When all you have to do is lie to her and then make the same mistake all over again, for noble reasons always. So, no, I don't think you can isolate this. So the real question is, how do we respond? Like, what's the logic that sees Fred Burks busily typing at home about the latest evidence about an insider job at the World Trade Center and staying absolutely silent? No, how can I help? No, let's get the word out and keep the public safe. You do not need to know that your leadership is sexually abusing you and incompetent. You do need to know that the World Trade Center is an inside job. Oh, Fred, this is insane. But Fred's too busy to go over the rationale. He's been too busy since the first time he broke a container with me in the very first month. Right around the time Peter did 10 years ago. And he's too busy to clean it up. But he's not too busy to go in and become a new unlicensed therapist dealing with sex. So keep an eye out for Fred Burks. He'll fuck you up, be too busy to clean it up, and collude, if you get hurt by him or someone else, to keep it silent. And he's welcome to come on at any time for a full interview and get it out there if he has a point of view. But my point of view is, if you're too busy to clean up your messes, if you're too busy to protect the public, get the fuck away from sex and unlicensed therapy. You'll be doing everyone a favor. We're just creating the next round of Peters who learned from the last round. So that's the crisis of this, and it's nothing new. This has been going on for decades. You probably can't throw a stone in San Francisco without some horrendous sexual traumatic abuse story with power, gurus, poor boundaries, trauma, you name it. Well, this is a great opportunity to learn. But I want to talk a little bit about where we are. Because, frankly, I'm a bit late, meaning the average sexual abuse survivor takes 11 years to talk about the abuse. That's how devastating it is and disorienting. So, what am I, at year 6? So I'm coming in late as far as protecting the last woman who called me who was sexually abused with high. I'm too late for her. You're too late for her. Meaning the entire group of people that was silent when I first put out some hints about this, every single one of you set this woman up to be sexually abused. It's just what happens when nobody speaks up and holds power accountable. So good on you. You got one down. That's just the one I've heard about. A trauma therapist who's no longer helping abused children because she's regressed to age 3 after the runaround and abuse and shamed dynamic, which, like my abuse, reenacted her incest. You see, no one at high actually bothers to learn the patterns before reenacting them. She's an incest survivor until age 15. Was constantly attacked and blamed for telling the truth about the incest. So what? She gets re-abused at high, and then everyone in high leadership gets angry at her for telling the police what happened? It's just the same reenactment. You don't matter. Our reputation matters. The family reputation mattered. Now High's reputation matters. It's all more important than you are. You just keep going through shit, trauma, and shame that we can't bother to understand. And I'm sure you'll get over it again. When you're ready, come back for another workshop and we'll be just as ignorant the next time. So what's going on in all this dynamic? Why am I late, for example? 6 years before making this particular effort. 6 years before suing High. Because that's the last resort, and it's available when people have a 10-hour recording and hundreds of emails and backup witnesses. It's available. But what's the resistance? And it's really important to understand, because as pissed off as I am at the cowardice of all of you, every last one of you that I've written to before is a complete coward. Now that's the authentic rage of a victim, where a circle stood around and did nothing. It's predictable. You want to have more rage in your community? Just stand around and pretend it's no big deal when people's guts get ripped out. And of course, if you want to be narcissistic about it, Peter can go on about how his guts are being ripped out and how unfair it is and all that. And on some level, it's true. It was unkind for the facilitators to tell him he was up to the job. They did him a disservice. They did you a disservice. They did me a disservice. They did themselves a disservice. It's cruel all around. Everyone loses when someone who cannot do the job is promoted to do the job. Even if you can drive a truck, let's just go into that analogy. You can drive a truck safely 99% of the time. Wonderful. Great. Best truck driver around. But 1% of the time, you black out. You can't control your body. And you drive a semi-truck through 6 other vehicles, creating a total road wreck, and flip your truck over and cause $300,000 in lost cargo damage. Should you be driving that truck? Well, in every 100 minutes, you're just blacking out for 1 minute. It's still enough to statistically cause damage, particularly if you don't have a backup plan and you bury that truth. I don't want to get fired, so I don't want anyone to know that I black out. So then no one can protect themselves and protect you. So what's going on here with these statistical, the massive amounts of apathy, passivity, cruelty? I mean, some people have taken this opportunity to lob insults at me. And not one person in 600 has said, how can I help? Now, what do we make of that? Well, trauma stimulates and brings the reptilian brain to the foreground. And trauma is not empathic. It's fear-based. It's induced with shame. It's induced with trauma. It's induced by fear of survival. It's fear-based. Once you're in the reptilian brain, you have no empathy. And if you're scared, and when you are scared, you are self-centered and self-absorbed, that's a byproduct and a healthy one. So traumatized people are sociopathic by nature. So that's one thing we can look at, and it's not about the innate nature of the person, because people don't get traumatized out of nowhere. It takes a traumatic cult and a traumatically illiterate cult that doesn't repair the trauma to produce highly traumatized people. So we are a highly traumatized cult, and our reptilian brains and our fears are very loud. There is no reason to respond, to confront a leader, to confront an authority figure, to spend effort on change, or to face the unknown if you are operating from the reptilian brain. Head down, it's not my problem, look the other way. So that's one of the issues. We are a highly traumatized cult with very active reptilian brains, myself included. So that's one thing. The other is a series of evolutionary distinctions. Because if you think of being 5 years old and you're with a dysfunctional family, you see all kinds of crazy things. But you learn that if someone asks Dad why he says don't drink and drive, and then has 8 beers and drives and hits the car in the road, and everyone knows that you don't say anything about that because you don't want to be whipped for being sassy, for telling the truth in the room, right? So you learn to pretend. This is wonderful, isn't it? Isn't it so nice? Look, Dad, the moon's out there. We're not going to say Dad did anything wrong, right? So nice out here. No, don't worry about us, Dad. Thank you for not killing us. I'm sure, just sleep it off. No one's going to deal with the pink elephant in the room. Why? Because they don't want to be beaten by a giant. And they don't want to be punished for the next 6 months. And that's also the case. Reptilian power figures take revenge. Trump has a whole chapter about how anyone who causes him any problems whatsoever, or perceived problems, he adds to a list, and his goal is to punish them 5 times more than the perceived slight. And that's has a very active list that he's working on about that. And and so if you don't want a giant, whether it's a rich person or your facilitators or the whole group or Mr. Trump having you on their list as a troublemaker to have revenge, well, just don't bring it up. So there's some good training in our family about how to enable dysfunctional, crazy abusers and not bring it up. So that's certainly alive in me. It's so alive in me in terms of, as a sensitive, some of the biggest traumas of my early life were being whipped, being hit with a stick, having my ear pulled. Why? Because I didn't figure out what it was I wasn't supposed to say. It is so terrifying, so humiliating as a sensitive young child to look into the eyes of a giant and see how much he hates you, how much he rages at you, the sheer intensity. And that giant is blaming you for his feelings. Yeah, it's like, I'll get killed for speaking. So, you grow out of that, and the giant gets to be normal size as you become the same size as what was to a 5-year-old a giant. But until that happens, there's the law of mass. Well, the same thing happens when an individual goes against a group. Some of the hardest groups to confront, particularly if you're conflict averse, are your therapists. You want your therapist to like you, to validate you more than anyone else, because they know you in this cult. See, in this cult, it's a very funny phenomena. But we're so shame-based as a cult that it is considered an attribute to have secrets. So the idea is that you will go to a stranger who's the one person in your life who doesn't need to hear what's going on. They're called therapists. You go to a stranger who's out of the situation and you tell them the truth about the situation. And then you go back to your situation and lie to everyone in the situation who would benefit from the truth. And the therapist, grasping the shame-based nature of the cult, meaning that this cult is ashamed of the truth, feels bad about the truth, and expects to be punished for telling the truth, to such an extent that one of the greatest attributes of a therapist is secrecy. You can rest assured, I will not say a word that you tell me to any of the people in your life that need to know this information to actually see you clearly. Pay my bill, my lips are sealed. And it's like, thank you. I'm so glad I can rely on your discretion. That way all my problems can continue for another 10 years, at which point the people in my life will say, oh, I had no idea that's why you did this and this. I thought it was like this and this and this. Well, I told my therapist, and she promised not to tell you. So I didn't tell you. My therapist promised not to tell you. So you had no idea for 10 years. And we've enjoyed the misunderstanding, as inefficiently as possible. We kept up the lies as long as we possibly could, and then it's just too much work. I've got to tell you the truth. And so, what is this? Well, it's secrets for hire is one thing it is. But it is, I'm confronting 4 of my therapists simultaneously for the right to actually be seen. It's great that they're all willing and want to make sure that nobody knows what goes on. Unfortunately, I understand psychology enough after studying this 1,000 hours to know that there will be victim after victim after victim after victim after victim. And unless the template of deny, shame, pressure to secrecy, and exclude shifts to own, apologize, learn, and tell the community, that will be the indefinite reality. Now, you may well be, probably are, perfectly capable of not getting that. That's what 0 hours of emotional literacy in school will buy you. 0 hours of relational literacy, 0 hours of psychological literacy, no sense of emotional science, chauvinism that discounts feelings. It'll buy you a lot if you want to invest in willful ignorance. But no trained, competent psychologist believes any differently. The statistics are there. And you don't bet against the house when the odds are stacked heavily against you if you want to win long term. You cannot be committed to a world where everyone wins if you participate in statistics where person after person loses 99% of the time. It's way better, is way worse than Vegas. So what's going on with me and Fred and Rich and all the people who don't want to deal with the reality? See, the reality is it took 10 hours of incompetence to fuck up 10 years of my life. That's all it took, 10 hours. It's highly leveraged. A therapist is granted very high leverage for a number of reasons. When they use that to your benefit, it has fabulous results. When you don't, it has terrible results. But what's going on for everyone else in this dynamic? Well, first thing, it's important to acknowledge I have effectively been walled out of the community. My email lists were cut off. When I disclosed that I would tell the truth, they cut off my email list. Now, this had worked for them in the past. In fact, I read an online report of a woman who complained about various abuses, and they just cut her off on the email and said it was too much time to talk to her, and just cut her off. They made the mistake. They weren't willing to admit the mistake. She wasn't willing to say it was her fault, because that would fix the situation. I used to have a girlfriend that I met at a high intern, who would make various mistakes, and I would point them out to her, and she would become very rigid and reject me sexually and and she would just block me until I apologized for her mistake. So I got very good at it. I'd make a list of all her mistakes, and then I would apologize for them. And she was always very lively and delighted, and it was wonderful. And the same thing will work for the high facilitators. If you will simply list all of the facilitators' mistakes, and, Peter, I'm so sorry that I allowed you to sexually abuse me while high on psychedelics. What was I thinking? I know I was out of my mind because you induced the overdose, but we couldn't have expected you to study up on psychedelic protocols before hiring out at $175 an hour. You were doing me a favor. Oh, I'm so glad you realized this. Well, then you're back in the clan. Peter's the wonderful, loving person who doesn't make any mistakes, and I'm the poor schmuck who actually thought that going to school to learn about these things meant that the teachers knew more than I did. Such is life. Pay out another few thousand, see if the situation changes or the insanity is produced by doing the same thing. So, fine. So, you have a good chance of being kicked out, but you have much less of a chance than I do. Why? Why do you have less of a chance than I do? Well, they'd been successful at just knocking people off the email list, blacklisting, silencing. You can't come to workshops unless you agree not to say this and all this. And that's been working for them. There wasn't the internet 30 years ago when they just blocked people off like this. So the fact that I've bought the domains that High couldn't be bothered to buy, and that people actually come across this territory means they actually have to question whether they like the situation. Do they want that to be in print? Do they want it to be in a documentary about High? It'd be nice to be able to just tell them to go fuck themselves and say this is just out of love and goodwill, but that's not going to work. Nobody's going to pay to be treated that way if they know in advance they're going to be treated that way. So that's precedent's been set. Whatever you do and say, and if your email account goes dead, it just becomes more evidence in court that they are violating a sacred ethical responsibility. If you're going to traumatize someone, they need community support. If you are the traumatizer, and then you cut off the community's support so that their health deteriorates, so that your reputation is saved, you are complicit in a number of state and federal crimes, particularly as paid therapists. So they'd like to be able to, but they can't because it's out in the open. So I will give you space, meaning my protocol for fairness is 100% unabridged. Why? Well, I'm no doubt making lots of mistakes. Don't look at me as a emotionally, psychologically regressed, fucked up therapeutic patient who's grown up in an American cult of chauvinism and stupidity and say, this guy knows what he's talking about. Of course I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, how's someone going to be able to parse out the bits of me that are sane and the bits of me that are brainwashed, and the bits of me that have been fucked over by High, and the bits of me that have been fucked over by my parents, and the bits of me that are actually me? How are they going to figure that out if I edit? So, from day one, my job is to get the pattern into the open. Why? Because if there are any competent doctors, they want all the data. If that's a doctor on community, if that's a doctor High wants to hire to fix up their act, because they're destroying their body by violating their mission, their ethics, the law, common decency, traumatizing clients, all the rest. They're fucking up their whole mission. So if they bring in a business consultant, the first thing the business consultant will do is say, don't deny what's on a 10-hour recording, and don't, for goodness sake, don't say that it's not a High issue to sexually abuse a client by a High facilitator. Give me a break. No, I wouldn't hire you myself, you fucking morons. Cut it out, apologize, clean up your act. That's what a business consultant will say. If you hire a psychologist, they'll say, get some fucking training and put your patient first, or I'll turn you in myself. If they bring in the police, they'll say, you broke the law here, 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 here. Do you want to go in handcuffs or what? If they bring in an empathic, compassionate, psychologically literate human being, they will say, take care of the people you fucked up and then clean up your act in the kindest possible way. So a doctor needs data. Now similarly, if my attorney needs, this is the data. This is what's in my mind. This is the best I've got. And if it's fucked up, well, please explain it. Now, the way to avoid being diagnosed is secrecy, shame, and communication blockades. So one shouldn't expect, based on the precedent so far, that High would actually get into the, like, for example, if High had a bunch of issues to clear up, they might say, first of all, we're really sorry and we apologize in this. And then secondly, would you mind having a 10-hour video conversation with us, Dane? And we'll record it 100% so that the community knows what's going on and can make an evaluation, and so the courts can see, and so that everyone can see what's going on. I'd be up for that in a heartbeat. You see, but the first lie precludes that. The first lie is this is not a High issue. So we don't have it. Because you will find them making it a High issue to bury it, but somehow it's not a High issue to talk about it, or to own it, or to take responsibility for it. Well, that's a weak position, because if it's only a High issue to hide, you're acknowledging it is a High issue. You're just saying you're on the wrong side of it. It's a key High issue. Our number one priority is to bury this story. Well, why does it need to be buried if it's not a High issue to begin with? If your story is that Dane just got fucked up on his own, and the fact that your student and teacher and colleague that you recommended just happened to have sex with him as he was doing it, well, what's the big deal if everyone knows? If it's not a High issue, you don't trust the public to make up their own mind? It's a weak position. Now, it is a High issue to keep it quiet. It's not a High issue to apologize for and take responsibility for, because we're busy making the whole world win. We don't have time for our clients. So what's going on in the 600 or so? It's easy, and I think it's important to call out leaders. If Fred wasn't an authority figure in many communities and putting out his shingle to do unlicensed sexual therapy, well, he's as ignorant as the next American. What's the big deal? We're going to go through and name the entire country, who don't know this and who don't know that and who abuse this person. And no, but we can start by acknowledging that the last thing the country needs is fucked up people who don't know they're fucked up and who are enabling other people who are fucked up to charge money to fuck other people up. We can start with that. So why won't you do anything? Well, you could be cut off. It's also very uncomfortable, and there's a one-way vertical relationship that goes on with many therapists, where they know all the things that you feel are unlovable, meaning your parents taught you that this part of yourself was unlovable. And you decided to believe them because when you argued with them, they hit you over the head, and you didn't want to get hit over the head. And if you just said, sure, I am unlovable in that area and I'm bad and I apologize, they stopped hitting you over the head, and so it felt better. And so so a deep part feels this is unlovable. Now, the last thing you want to do is go to a therapist and have them say, yeah, it is. I can't love you there. In fact, get out of my office. No amount of money is enough to handle this situation. You desperately want them to say, it's lovable. Your parents couldn't love them. Maybe you can't love them, but they are lovable. And as evidence, I'm not going to kick you out of here. Well, your therapists are addicts, like the rest of the country. They're ignorant, like the rest of the country. They don't like dealing with their shit, like the rest of the country. Now, I've spent $150,000 with therapists, and I'm pretty perceptive. And so I've worked with 40 different practitioners. And so I get to see, oh, this one's good at that. This one's terrible at that. That one's a great listener. This one interrupts me and tells me I'm wrong every second sentence. This person makes good ideas. This person has never given me a single good idea in my entire life. This person charges $200 an hour and I feel crappy half the time. This person charges $100 an hour and I feel great 90% of the time. This person, you notice. And you notice little pockets where their face freezes. You get into this topic, they go study cold, right? They can't say anything because they're the therapist, but you watch their face freeze up every time you drift in that topic. And you realize they haven't dealt with their shit there. And you also realize they're not present with you when they get into that area. So suddenly you have to skirt around that area, or they see you as the enemy, as the client. It doesn't matter that they're not, it's not a mental thing. They don't have any control over that domain. But I, as the observant client, have to make sure that my therapy doesn't get too close to their shit, so that I become the enemy in reactive, triggering eyes, because they haven't done their shit. And they won't admit that they haven't done their shit because it makes them feel shame that they're not good therapists in that area. So it is a very delicate area. And I remember one Steve, who wouldn't talk to Hi when I brought up all this stuff to him. I said, look, this is terrible. I'm all alone. I feel like I'm going to die every time I try and confront them. I need an ally. He said, I couldn't do that. He said, these guys sound like they're absolutely nuts. I said, yes, that's why we need to bring in some public awareness. You can't just let person after person get fucked up by them. You're one of their colleagues. Write them a letter. Point out the stuff that is obvious to you and I. Maybe they'll listen to you. They won't acknowledge it from me. But if enough people write to them, they might listen. He said, I couldn't do that. These guys sound crazy. I don't want them coming after me. So we have a narcissistic, scared little therapist, more worried about another therapist coming after him than sticking up for his client or the next client of the colleague. It's absolutely pathologically narcissistic and sociopathic. I couldn't deal with them as a therapist. Let's let you as a regressed client deal with them. It's nuts. Well, Peter, Steve had all kinds of little areas where his eyes would become beady and hostile as he remembered the betrayals of his spiritual community and this and that and the other. Now, I thought it would be good for him to work on his stuff. Well, he never did in 10 years. I just learned to keep around it because I didn't want him to attack me in my therapy session. Well, that's the state of therapy. He was one of the best of the 40, by the way. Or I would have picked one of the other 40. But this is what we're leaving fucked up, sexually abused kids to deal with. People like Steve, people like Peter, people like Ann Watts, and those are the good ones. If Anne had not betrayed her role and been the first person to push hard to have me not tell the community what went on, which makes me an enabler in all the sexual abuse that happens from this point forward. It's just the only way around it. Because if I tell everyone what's going on, and people are able to keep safe from that, then I'm not an enabler. If you tell everyone what's going on, you're not an enabler. If a year from now you've shut up and all your friends have shut up, and then someone else commits suicide, that's on you. Not exclusively, it's on all of us. We, as a circle, are too narcissistic, too sociopathic, too ignorant, too frightened, too overwhelmed to stop another life spinning down at the hands of dysfunctional teachers and therapists. But even if you're on board of all that, there are still some dynamics that can be useful to explore. One of them is the fact that, you learn to collude with your parents because you had no one else. And one of the reasons it was hard for me to break rank with all of my therapists and all of my leaders and all of my community is because high was the number one source by a long shot of love and belonging in my life as I defined love and belonging at that time. So high contained 75% of love and belonging at the time this occurred. And I think it's why I didn't call it sexual abuse when Peter tried to seduce me 10 years earlier, and I just left. See, I wasn't in an overdose then, so when it felt bad, I got up and left, as opposed to, being dissociative. So, now Peter called that love. Felt terrible to me, but Sarah was on Peter's side, and she was one of my therapists. She was afraid of me for years. I'd look in her eyes. There was fear in her eyes. Because she knew the truth. She knew that her husband had jeopardized her career, his career, high, and her money by behaving the way he did with a therapeutic client. So she had every reason to be afraid if her concern was the truth would come out, and her concern was not that her husband was fucking up her own clients with her knowledge and her collusion. So, she was afraid. So I don't like people being scared of me. I don't want to be the focal point of all of this. I want to protect innocent people who I grasp from the data are not going to be protected unless a small group of people stand up. Now, in the family dynamic of clan, you instinctively appease and protect the power structure that keeps you alive, or you die, basically. So that's the childlike level of loyalty. These are the guys that feed me. They told me to shut up. They told me to lie to the police. They told me to do this. I did this, and they'll feed me again. These are the people that give me love and belonging. They tell me not to go to the police. Fine. I'll cover up their crimes. I don't want to be cut out. I don't want to be cut out like Dane, right? So that's a fear-based, childlike, instinctive loyalty. Wherever your food comes from, you don't speak up. And this happens all over the place. I'm protesting homelessness in Marin County right now because I don't like seeing more homelessness in my town than I do in third world countries where people make 10 times to 20 times less money and there's no homelessness. I don't like seeing that. But the people who know why there's so much homelessness the most are the contractors. And they all have to get their permits from the power structure. So the only people who will come on record and talk to me are the retired ones. And they will lay into the profound sociopathic incompetence and cruelty of Marin County, the Mill Valley Permit Office. They'll go into it. And I know all of this because I'm a contractor. But I'm the only one who's still working and needs to get permits from them from time to time, that's putting human life ahead of cozying up to the power structure that's leading to more and more homelessness, that's killing one American after another, taking 26 years off their life, giving 42% of them PTSD. I'm sick of it. And I don't want my tax money used to make more people homeless, which is the byproduct of having more than 1,000 separate regulations that make sure that it is illegal to build a house for less than $650,000. So, if you're fear-based and self-centered, you are correct in the short term. In the long term, is it really worth being frightened your whole life and just able to focus on you? It's not that interesting. And watching one innocent person after another go down to protect that level of sociopathic mediocrity? Really? Is that? But sure, if you're in a panic and don't want to rock the boat and you're shame-based and frightened and don't want anyone to look at you, yeah, don't be one of these small minorities of people protecting innocence. Just wait for them and fine. But if you think you know what you're doing and you think you're not a coward and you think you're actually helping, how might that illusion come about? Well, the clan loyalty is one of the forms of loyalty. It's because you can be loyal to a person. I like you, therefore you can, I've had women do this at High. I like you, Dane. I want to have sex with you. I've had women invite me to slap them. One woman would say the most irritating things, and I was concerned that I felt like slapping her, right? I said, I don't think this is a good relationship. I get so frustrated with you, and specifically with you, not anyone else. I feel like slapping you. I don't want to feel that way, and I don't want to slap you. She said, it's fine. She said, I irritate a lot of people. Just go ahead and slap me. Well, I felt uncomfortable being invited to abuse someone. I got out because I was worried that if she kept going on and irritating me and inviting me to slap her, I would. And then simply by choosing to be in that dynamic, I would now be a domestic abuser. And the fact that she enjoyed it or invited it or said it was no big deal wouldn't change the fact that it is not the person I wanted to be. So I left. But there are people who, if they like you, you can do no wrong. And if they don't like you, they treat you like shit, even if you're on the right side of what they say they value. So these are important distinctions to understand. And if you're in that camp where I like Peter Sandel, I liked him. He's got wonderful traits, many specific qualities that are great, which all increase the damage he causes if he doesn't have any ethics. If you've got great charm and warmth and can make people feel safe and a soothing voice and you use it to con people, you're far more dangerous than if you're a rugged hitman that people can see coming. So, that's one set of distinctions. I like you, so whatever you do is fine, I'm supporting you. Sarah said, this is my husband, he's my husband, I'm going to support him before you. Well, you're my therapist, Sarah. You trained the person who abused me. You enabled it 10 years ago, now you're enabling it again. You're breaking the law. You're not putting your client first. Of course, the trouble with untrained people is they're too untrained to know how badly they're behaving and don't learn that until, an actual trained psychotherapist in court goes through piece by piece email and tape and stuff and says, look, Your Honor, these are the therapeutic guidelines. These people are doing worse than therapy. They're having sex with their clients. And they're doing the exact opposite. Well, then they know what they didn't know. It's a bit late, though, when they're bankrupt. Why not listen when a sexual abuse survivor says, hear me? It would be a lot easier. More people would win. So
You may be in that camp. The other thing you may be in is generalization. As I say, at the time this was going down, 70% of my love and belonging needs, as I defined it at the time, were being met by high. So high is a good thing. Now, there's an interesting bunch of psychology here when everyone and every group makes mistakes. Now, the enemy of the group and the person is the mistake. Like, the enemy to the Human Awareness Institute and to Peter Sandhill's peace of mind is him choosing to escalate a romantic relationship with a client and refusing to give a refund. That's the pink elephant in the room. The problem is not that people learn what someone in a professional capacity charging money to do something did. If your position is, it's fine if plumbers sprout 2,000-gallon leaks and ruin the whole hardwood floor, that's fine. But it is outrageous that clients have the audacity to write a Yelp review that says, I'm never going to use that plumber again. It cost me $30,000 to repair my hardwood floors, and he didn't even fix the leak. Well, that's what happened with Peter Sandhill. He didn't fix the leak. He flooded the house. But of course, he's concerned that this will ruin his reputation. But the talking does not ruin your reputation if the talking is accurate. You did. If someone tells the truth and that ruins your reputation, you ruined your reputation. And the person telling the truth is doing their job to protect the next victim. If you want to do your job, stop abusing them. It's that simple. Now, you may be in the camp of, I like the group, I like the person, and it's black or white. That's my group, so nobody messes with it. So it's kind of similar, like I like that person, so if they're rude to me, I'll just smile and pretend it didn't happen. Or if someone, if I don't like, was less rude to me, I'll give them the finger and say, no one can be rude to me except the people I like, right? And then there's another important blurring or distinction, and it has to do with stages of development. Some people can separate the protocol from the person, the behavior and the being, and some people cannot. This is a good person, so whatever they do is good. This is a bad person, so whatever they do is bad. Or, this is a person. This bit kills people. This bit is fine. This makes people fat. And this bit fucks up people with PTSD. And this bit is very nice. Meaning the person knows a repertoire of behaviors, some of which are destructive, some of which are mixed, and some of which are highly beneficial. And if I like the person or I don't like the person, you're not focusing on the protocol. So it's a more complex vision of someone to say, this is a person. I like this behavior because, statistically speaking, things get better for more people. And I don't like this behavior because it kills people. And I don't like that behavior because it makes them feel miserable. And I don't like this because of this. And you look at the statistical outcome. For example, I hate saying any of this from the point of view of it's going to make my facilitators, all of whom I liked or like to one degree or another, uncomfortable. That's not the point. The point is, if you're in the business of repeating a pattern for money that's hurting people, you're building up a mountain of karma and hurting a lot of people, which damages my world. And that's not okay. So the person and the behavior. The real focus for a mature, sophisticated person is not this is a good person, that's a bad person. That's not the question. It's which behaviors are at what point on the intelligence continuum. Intelligence is measured by the efficiency with which energy, time, money, and natural resource is transformed into sustainable well-being for as many people as possible for as long as possible. To screw up one person's life in 6 hours is very low on the intelligent continuum. It's absolutely insane. And if you can manage to screw your own life up at the same time, and if you can manage to destroy your organization at the same time, it's even lower on the intelligence continuum. In other words, to be a facilitator in a public nonprofit and participate in a 10-hour ritual that breaks multiple laws, breaks your patient's heart, induces PTSD, threatens your whole organization, causes you to go do the exact opposite of your principles, and does that for dozens of people around you, and then ruins the participant's life, and when they have PTSD, causes all kinds of pain to the people around them, is one of the lowest. I mean, it's highly efficient if you want to rank evil. It causes more unnecessary suffering for more people for your measly 10 hours. I mean, you want to destroy the planet? Just take a course from Peter Sandhill. So the problem is not, see, some people they're focused on the person. Peter is irrelevant, except that he was trained by people, which suggests that other people still taking money to teach in this field who taught him and enabled his blind spots and supported a position where you don't even apologize for this. They're still fucking up other people. It's not intelligent to not speak up about this if you want it to stop. The focus is not on the person. The person is just a person who's regurgitating the patterns they've learned. These are not new patterns. They've been going on for thousands of years. At a deep level, they have nothing to do with Peter Sandhill, other than the patterns have infected his body and his psyche, which means he's sick, which means he's suffering in a diseased body. If you give a damn about him, help him break the pattern. So then you have paradigms, like the paradigm of medicine, which I use on Understand Abuse at the Human Awareness Institute.org, where I break down all the symptoms, all the diagnoses, all the medicine. And the paradigm of healing, if someone is insane and you inject them with a drug and they get sane, now they're sane. It's not about right and wrong, good and bad. Everyone suffers when people are sick, crazy, and sociopathic, and everyone benefits when they are sane, intelligent, and empathic. So what is the medicine that induces that result? And I'm saying it cannot be done. When people like Peter Sandhill are so blind that they are blind, one or two people telling him isn't going to do it. But all of the people around them, okay, well, I'll attune to that. So So you have the protocol and you have the person. You have paradigms, because the paradigm of punishment is, a few thousand years old, and it basically says that you hurt this person, and that costs damage to the community. So we're going to spend community money to hurt you, which also hurts the community. You killed this breadwinner, and now 4 children don't have a home. We're not going to do anything to help those 4 children, because that would be intelligent. What we're going to do is we're going to hurt your dad and take him away from your kids, and we're going to spend $4 million to put him away for 40 years. And the public is going to pay that money so that everyone loses. The original 4 kids, the next 4 kids, and the entire tax base, and none of that money, because we could have planted 400 million trees for $40 million. Or at least we could have planted 40 million trees. So we could have planted 40 million trees for $4 million. We could have had the one person work hard to hire a competent parent to take care of the other guy's 4 kids. But now we're dealing with the medicine terrain as opposed to the eye for an eye terrain. So the reptile is eye for an eye, reptilian brain, and it is not happy unless someone is punished. So my reptilian brain is not happy until, people involved pay for what they have done. That's the reptilian brain. If you want to traumatize people and leave them in a traumatized state, they will be in their reptilian brain and want revenge. So you kind of get what you're asking for, which is why it's rather self-loathing to induce people into the reptilian brain unless you want them working to undermine you, because that's what they'll do if you traumatize them, activate their reptilian brain, and leave them there, and they can't get out. They will feel absolutely terrible. They'll look around. Why did this happen? They'll think of you and say, this has got to be stopped. So that is evolution, by the way. Then the traumatized victim undermines their abuser, and the system collapses, and hopefully a more intelligent system, goes into place. You have the medicinal paradigm, where you're sick and you're infecting other people. You're not a bad person, you're sick. And that's hurting you, but you're contagious and you're infecting, so we got to isolate you. You've got the coronavirus. Don't see 100 clients a week. You've got shame and incompetency. Don't put yourself in the role of being the most important person in your client's life until you heal your disease. Get fixed. Well, I'm sure Peter thinks that he's been fixed. Can anyone believe that without even offering a refund for the damaged work? It's laughable, but it's expedient. And we are a sick cult that likes expediency. So one sickness leads to another. Most of us pretend we have no time to become psychologically illiterate because we're spending so much energy and time repairing and fearing the damage that directly comes from our psychological illiteracy. It's a self-perpetuating loop. Nobody has time to talk about all these things with me, by the way, in the United States. They're far too busy getting fat, managing the anxiety they have because they're psychologically illiterate, to spend a few hours becoming a little bit more psychologically illiterate. And the shame that truth induces, which that's not a shaming truth. Anyone should care about that. There's nothing wrong with that person. But they think there is. That's the virus of shame. They feel ashamed to be seen doing that rather than care, because shame is what was given to them. Love was withheld. They don't have the love that says, I'm going to put in the hours and turn off the TV. if we want a different world, we have to interrupt that cycle with a little bit of truth. Now, the average American watches, I think, 6 hours of TV a day. And 600 high participants all have no time to talk about this, but have, on average, 6 hours a day of TV to hide their feelings in and avoid this. That's not very intelligent. But who said cults were intelligent? Americans are not a very intelligent cult. We consume more energy per capita than any cult in human history, number one. We do so unsustainably, number two. Number three, 70% of Americans are relatively unhappy. 20% are depressed, 25% are dealing with sexual abuse, dynamics, 70% hate their jobs. So we get very low yields of sustainable well-being for the cult norm. So if you're normal, there's a very high odds that you're spending vast amounts of energy every single week to feel relatively miserable and are in fear of feeling worse. That's America. And it's, what do we give it, 3 out of 10 on the intelligence continuum? Well, that means you have to be abnormal in the right direction. You can be abnormal and be worse than the majority. You have to be abnormal in the right direction to break that trend. So if you focus on the person, if you're focusing on the group, if it's black or white, you're going to pick your favorite person or your favorite group. Now, also, if you're in a place of need, you will always pick the biggest side because you depend on the group for your survival. It could be your social survival, your emotional survival, your financial survival, whatever it is, survival, your physical survival. If you are in a place of need and insecurity, and you've got one person over here saying something that sounds perfectly reasonable, and you've got 100 people over here that are saying something that sounds rather absurd, your odds are better if there's a tension, a conflict, with joining this group. It's a shaky bet because they'll all reinforce each other and look out for each other as long as they all agree on the position. Because that's the nature of identity positions. We are the blacks, we are the whites, we are the rich ones, we're the poor ones, we're the homeless, whatever. Identity politics is we're this, and we're all together in that. Now, the downside to doing that, you won't be lonely. Everyone will agree with each other pretty much in that group. But the downside is the majority is always wrong. Meaning the 1% minority always does something better than the majority. Always. It's a mathematical certainty. It's like asking, well, why is that? Well, if you look at a bell curve of any trend, why is it that the bell curve always begins with 2 or 3 people? And then it goes to 10 people and 20. Why does every bell curve begin with a tiny group? Why do every positive new change and new idea and new technology and evolution begin with a 1%? Why? Just how it works. Why does every oak tree begin with 2 leaves? It does. So those 2 leaves are the future of the next oak tree. They're not better or worse than any others, but they have superior intelligence. Because evolution says that the next oak tree will be more innovative to its environment and more adaptive than the present one, statistically speaking. So you have focusing on protocol, but that requires, see, if you are a principle-based, mathematics-based analyzer, you have got to be independent, financially, emotionally, logistically, etc. Because if you've got 1,000 people all gunning for you, and you're one person, and they control your needs, they will cut your needs off. What did the high facilitators do when I refused to keep their secret? They cut me off from my entire community at the very point I needed most love and belonging. Well, that's a crime, but they still did it. And it's communicating an important reality. If you're not independent, you cannot afford. Now, I was not independent at the time, but I was able to evacuate myself out of the country and rapidly, by immersing myself in Thai and Philippine culture, restore the love and belonging that was chopped off, restore that particular blood supply at a time where, in a state of heartbreak and PTSD, I might have died had the facilitators cut off the social support. Meaning that's an act of murder, and it is an act of increasing PTSD. Because if you do what Peter Sandhill did to me, statistically, to 1,000 men in my position, a number of them, let's say 20% of them, will end up dead. I came close to it 6 times. So it's a murderous protocol. It's not a protocol where anyone wins. But I wasn't part of those 20% who died, or would have died. I got myself out of there. And was very fortunate to train an instinctive energy healer in Manila, who I paid double wages, 5 hours a day, for 150 hours, day after day, to give emergency surgery to the psychic wound of the butchery of a public nonprofit that would first sexually abuse a client, then cover it up, and then cut off their support to hide their dirty secret. Now that's about as evil as I've ever encountered. Evil being devolutionary. It's a position that takes vast amounts of energy and does massive amounts of harm to everyone concerned, and then tries to bury the pattern so that the disease of ignorance, shame, and fear will go on indefinitely. And so that every facilitator learns from that protocol, the truth is the enemy of the Human Awareness Institute, and the public should be kept in the dark at all costs. Now, if you want to be a part of that pattern, you're in it. Just say nothing. If that makes you sick to your stomach. Now, at the point where I was in 500% more pain than I'd ever felt in my life, I realized that I'd rather die than have this cycle go on endlessly and do nothing about it. And I realized I don't care if I like Ann Watts. I don't care if Peter Sandhill is a charming and funny human being. They are destroying their mission, their life, their organization with these protocols. And no one gives a damn about them because you won't pick up the phone and fight. Not their being, their stupidity. You don't care enough about high, about love, about into me you see. You don't care enough about a raped incest survivor that's going to show up tomorrow and be fucked up and buried under the carpet. You don't care enough about yourself to learn and become psychologically literate. You don't care enough about evolution to get your ducks in a row to an independent position where you can afford to stand alone. Because the majority of this cult that are morons through no fault of their own, through a pattern of sustained, chauvinistic, psychological illiteracy, are not going to look favorably when you stand up and fight for their children, for their family. Because the high facilitators are losing more than anyone else by sustaining the delusionary lie that sexually abusing a high participant by a high client is not a high issue. And they are digging their graves and disgusting their future generations by refusing to apologize. We get what we're willing to have, not what we deserve. Every single one involved here deserves 10 times better. And the sad thing is, if you do the math, it would cost 1,000 times less energy for a single high facilitator to say 4 simple words: how can I help? How can I help? And then take a few hours to do it. Instead, they will spend any amount of time to bury their organization and ignore the data. It is cruel to let someone go down that route if you care about them, if you care about the planet, if you care about your future. Because there's not that much difference between us. If Peter's stupidity is not worth correcting, it means Peter's just not that important to be worth educating. If Peter isn't worth educating, why the fuck are you? Or me? Or your daughter? Are they really more special than Peter Sandhill? If it's not worth stopping the shit at high, why give a shit about Washington? Because the brain is intelligent. If you don't give a shit about me, you don't give a shit about yourself. Because I'm fighting for you. I'm fighting for your children. And I have positioned myself into a place where no matter how sick, how cruel, how stupid you behave, I'm holding this position. And if it has to dismantle high and create a national documentary, great, more people to learn. Americans love a good lawsuit. Millions can watch the documentary. But it's not the goal. The goal is to heal the disease. And you cannot do that from a psychologically illiterate state. You deserve a good 1,000 hours. Take the time. Take the time before you weigh in here. Because you're worth it. Because your life will benefit. Because despite being knocked lower than I've ever been by a 500% margin, the path that I've had to take to get back on my feet and get grounded in data is so much more informative and It's an intelligent map that I have been able to accomplish things with PTSD, with a broken heart, with chronic fatigue, and with money hemorrhaging out of my life. I've been able to accomplish things that I was not able to accomplish using the blind spots that I learned at high. And that's worth something. I mean, that is worth it. It's a very painful way to get into it, but the map of reality that I'm using has so many more useful distinctions that even though I'm starting back at square one, I'm speeding up at an exponential rate such that this will be beneficial, not because of the abuse, but because in order to get out of the abuse, I had to throw away everything that I learned at high and start reframing relationships and things with a different paradigm. If I was using everything I learned at high, I'd be stuck, and you would not get this recording. So 90% of you, for various reasons, will do absolutely nothing, and the abuse patterns will continue as they have been for generations for the reasons I outlined. You're not bad people. You're cowards. It's not your fault. But you are a participant in the abuse unless you use your energy to change the pattern. Now, I'm providing lots of different contexts and support for anyone who would like to do that. But it is my sincere belief that the kindest thing you can do for yourself, for your group, for your family, for the country, and for high is to become trauma literate, psychologically literate, relationally literate. What do I mean? Studying the statistics. Not the dogmas, not the affirmations, the statistics, and aligning with best practices. When you know what they are, because you've bothered to learn them, and start positioning your behavior in line with statistical improvements. If you go from a behavior that's good 50-50, meaning half the time it helps and half the time it ruins people's lives, to a protocol that's 70-30, 70% of the time it helps and 30% of the time it ruins people's lives, you've made progress. That's what you want to do, is position yourself to the best of your ability around practices, protocols that heal the rampant diseases that are not your fault, that were dumped on your head in abundance, so that you pass less of those diseases on to your daughter, less of them on to your husband and wife. That's all. And if you do that, because I've studied the data, you will find that I'm working along with you. Speak the truth. Make sure that people in positions are competent to do them, and if they're not, that those specific failings are explicitly disclaimed so that people don't pay money to get hurt. It's not too complicated. See that the people who are harmed by professionals get restored to good health by the professionals that harmed them. Just basic logic, basic empathy. Take away the names, the Human Awareness Institute. If you're going to spend more money trying to shut down information than you are telling the things people need to be aware of. Pair up the right words with the patterns. Don't call sex with a client love. Call it stupidity, because it is stupid to ruin 6 years of a person's life for 10 hours of ignorance. Because if we know it's stupid, we won't do it. But if we think it's loving, we're confused. Pair up the right words. Become psychologically literate. Don't fund incompetence. Challenge the incompetent to become competent. And forgive and forget once they have learned and made amends. It's not about punishment, at least in the empathic paradigm. And we will be in service to evolution. And thanks for going on this journey with me, which hopefully has enough bite to break through the incredible amount of apathy and ignorance that is all around us, inside and out.